Okay, we'll do a call to order. It is 3:30. Mark Cohen here. Chuck Dow here. John Cook. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Because I remember I had a Jane Cook. That's my hook. Carolyn Wilson.
Present.
Eric Yoder.
Present.
Kevin Beard.
Present.
And we know if normally you're here, so you threw me off.
I did, sorry.
Okay.
I'm gonna take one.
We do have a
Pass them
confirmation of quorum. I see Retha has passed out the minutes, and let's take a couple of minutes, read through it.
What you are getting now is Ryan's report.
Yeah.
That's passing. your way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So Crystal, I was very close on that number.
Where? I'm just updating it right now.
I had Ryan with me in September. So.
Just one typo, but I'm not worrying about it.
People are done with the minutes. I'd make a motion to approve them. I would second that motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay? Minutes have been accepted. Okay, so do we have any old business?
We do not.
Okay. And new business is where the effort has been. Do you want to introduce Crystal? I have met Crystal.
Yes, I think the mayor's actually going to do that. So the mayor is here today. He was not on our agenda at our last meeting. Chuck, you asked to maybe have the mayor come in, which was yes, we needed to do that to kind of understand his directives and what he's hoping as we become more active on this commission. So I'm going to let the mayor talk and then he can introduce Crystal. Thank you, Mayor.
And let me introduce Crystal Welch to you right now. She was with Admar. She is a technical advisor when it comes to TIF district and redevelopment and economic development. And she's going to guide us through some of the details that we don't necessarily have the in-house expertise to do. And spoken with her and she knows her business. So I'm sure she will provide good leadership. First off, I think most of you guys expire at the end of this year, and I'm not supposed to ask this. She told me not to, but I'm going to do it anyway. Does anybody not want to serve again next year? Good. I'm going to put you all down as a yes.
The reason I said
volunteered.
don't ask yet because we want to explain that you're going to be a lot busier than you have been in the past.
Stop.
I want to make sure that that's
You
okay
did not
with you.
lead with that.
I know.
There was a reason I didn't lead with that.
Trying
There was a
to.
reason I didn't lead with that.
Yes.
TIF district is one of the best tools that we have for economic development and redevelopment. And we have not really utilized that tool. We've been letting the money basically accumulate over the years. We have spent a little bit of it, but not very much. I want to change that. And I don't want to get into the minutia of what I want to do tonight because it's actually going to get very detailed and Crystal can help us walk through that later, but we need to get the spending plan done tonight. There's a deadline and we have to get that up and going and approved. So I don't want to waste a lot of time because you're going to really get into the spending plan this evening. But one of the goals I'd like to do is I'd like to expand our TIF district or create a new TIF district. I think Crystal's going to recommend that we expand the one that we have as opposed to creating new ones. Two target areas other than where we're at right now, out by 6920, what we've always referred to the tech park. We have had some interest in some developers putting some spec buildings up out there. How that works and the mechanism of it has a lot to be discussed yet, but we have had some inquiries there and it's something I'd like to pursue. The second area I'd like to consider TIFting, creating another TIF district or extending it to is our downtown area. We're starting to see some incremental increase or improvement in some of the real estate, which will have an incremental increase in the value of it, which would generating TIF revenue. We have some other opportunities in the downtown area that are kind of out there. We're not ready to really discuss those yet. But I'd like to get a TIF district established in the downtown area. What size of that area is yet to be determined, probably a couple blocks north of the square, a couple blocks south, a couple blocks to the east, and a couple blocks to the west, kind of encompassing our downtown area. How the exact layout of that is yet to be determined. The other area that I would like to consider establishing a TIF district is out by the Meyer store, the Meyer outlots and the Serenova development property, which was the old Nielsen farm. Ken Wilson has bought that. Serenova, he's one of the principals in Serenova. It's a fairly large piece of property, 110, 120 acres or something, I think is what it encompasses. It starts just to the south of Meyer, wraps around behind that store, and actually goes all the way to close to Glendarren. It connects both the county road and North Wayne Street. And I would like to consider doing that. What Crystal may recommend to you, and I'll leave that up to her, is do a spider TIF where you kind of go down the thoroughfare corridor of right away of the streets. So you've got this TIF district out here, a strip that goes down a road, TIF district here, another strip that goes up the road. and
He just
establishing
learned this
up
today. I can't believe he retained all of this information today.
He's a smarty party.
That's what she's going to recommend. My initial thought was establish 3 different TIF districts. She's thinking we should connect them all in one. That does enable us to move TIF revenue from there to over here, or from here down to here. So it allows you to shift things around a little bit as far as your TIF revenue. Like I said, I don't want to get into a lot of minutia on this stuff because you've got to get the spending plan done. But I just wanted to share what my thoughts were and what I'd like to do going forward. I would like to start using TIF as a tool to get some things developed and get some development and redevelopment started in our community. And with that, I'm going to leave you to get on to your business at hand unless you have any questions of me why I'm here this evening.
No, I'm really glad to hear that, actually, Dave. So very glad. So the one thing that, and this maybe is for Crystal, if you don't have TIF areas touching, does each one have to be separate? No, okay.
No, and they
Alright.
will touch, but they're generally, the connection is through a public right of way.
Okay,
So you still have the ability, so it's not like they're separate, because you would want to potentially do improvements in the right of way anyway. So the TIF funds for the local public improvements
For infrastructure,
very
sidewalks, anything
likely
that we
could
need to do.
be within that right of way anyway. So it's not like it's just a connector. It's a connector with the ability, if you need to make those public improvements, either to get utilities to the new TIF area or make improvements that are just needed along that corridor in general. It allows you to be a little more flexible. And it's a really good tool that alleviates some of the concern about incorporating properties that may already be developed into a TIF district that don't really create increment that's the purpose of the district. So it allows you to be much more intentional on what properties come in and what don't come into your TIF area.
And I think the question you asked, I don't know if you heard it, but they are connecting despite.
They are one. They're just one big TIF.
It's one, but it would be connected.
yeah.
Think of it as a spider, and you got.
And I've heard that.
Another.
I've heard it being used specifically for utilities too. Like they'll do that for internet comes in and they can spider it just to get internet from one or the other. I mean, am I correct in that? So there's some advantages on the utility side.
Yeah, generally you at least want to grab the parcel. So if you're just doing infrastructure, then yes, staying right in that right of way, because that's where all the infrastructure is going anyways. But if you want to collect any revenue, then you got to grab the parcels adjacent to the right of way as well. So that's why you can be a little more selective though, just because even if you want to do a project in the right of way, you don't have to grab the adjacent parcels if you don't want.
And there were, in our conversation earlier today, we talked about, and we're just going to touch on this shortly because we started working on our spend plan, but we've got to get that done. So I will tell you that earlier today, we met and talked a little bit about some public improvement projects. Like what are some things that we need? Is it connectivity? What are some areas? And I threw out some things that I wasn't even sure are these public improvement projects that would actually work. And we have talked forever, and I've looked at some different avenues on sidewalks on Wooler Street. Like, how can we make that happen? You know, we get complaints about it all the time. People want to walk. Well, we want to connect to our trail. That's a connectivity, but also we've got Center Lakes there. And, you know, if we tipped that, and I don't know that we're going to, I'm just throwing this out because you have to vote on this and this, but then could we help our Parks Department with some infrastructure, the pavilion or the restrooms or something that he might want to do at Center Lakes and connect all of that to that trail? Like, those are projects that we kind of got to get creative and go, hey, this is an option. Like, can we do this? I would love to do, and I've brought this up to a couple of you, you know, a memorial, a veterans memorial park or something like that. And those are public improvement projects that we can utilize and do something with and put some investment in some areas of our community that we really haven't invested in. And that shows that we care about our community, which spurs redevelopment, which spurs economic development, and those things can happen. So I think it all ties together and what that looks like. And when we talk about, and I asked the question, you know, what about our schools? And if we're creating this big TIF district, well, they need people, they need the pupils, they get that money from the state. So the bricks and mortar, the things that we invest in gets the housing, gets the people here, that gets them more students, and it all just works together. So I'm excited about what we can do. I just, and I'm learning right along with you guys on some of this. So we will dive into that for sure. But we did pass out the spending plan sheet that we're kind of going off of, and Crystal and I had some conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Before I leave,
Sorry.
thank you for all volunteering to serve again. Everyone at City Hall
Now you've committed, you guys do know that.
is very pleased with the level of talent and the level of commitment that you have shown to moving our city forward. And I thank you, and I appreciate everyone's service on this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So we will, and we wanted to kind of go through Crystal's scope of work. I know that I've talked to you guys about that previously. She is a wealth of knowledge. She's going to be a great resource for us. I've already learned a ton since the council had approved her last month in October, I believe. So I am excited about that. This spending plan, we have to turn into BLGF by December 1st. So we have kind of started some thoughts on that. And we can dig into it a little bit more. But what I'm hoping either tonight is that we go ahead and approve it, or what will have to happen, and I know we talked about this as another special meeting later this month to actually approve it. But part of all of these things that we're talking about, so our TIF plan has to be amended. It is very, very restrictive right now, and not just our TIF area, but our TIF plan, and then expanding our TIF area. And all of these things that we're going to do are going to take professional expenses. So I think when we were kind of going through on some of these projects, like, hey, here's some things that we are looking at, and I'll let Crystal kind of take it from here. But that was like our biggest one, and I about died, but it really was, on what is going to be needed to amend this, to do these, to get the things, to get us, this redevelopment commission, up to where the mayor does want us to. And amending our plan is not just, right now there's three items that it says we can do with our TIF money, which is ridiculous. I don't know why it was set up that way. So it's not just amending that, but it's rewriting that to allow us to possibly purchase properties with an acquisition list in our TIF district if need be, if they're run down or something that we can use as incentives. It's updating our plan to do a lot of these things for development that we just have never done. So Crystal, if you want to kind of talk about the spending plan and talk about the TIF, whatever.
Yep. So I'll just take a couple minutes to introduce myself and why you should pay me to help you. Crystal Welsh. I am a certified planner, land use planner, not a professional, a financial planner. I worked for 19 years for the city of Elkhart. And a large part of that was providing technical assistance to the city of Elkhart's Redevelopment Commission, which had 8 TIF districts. We did do a large combination where we took 4 TIFs and actually combined them into one. And it's called the consolidated TIF. to do exactly the kind of things the mayor was alluding to, which is gives you a lot more flexibility in where you can use the funds. And so 19 years of experience working, and again, that was one particular community that had a very aggressive redevelopment commission. And the mayor said, you're going to be busier next year, which is great. At one point, we were meeting every 2 weeks because we had so many projects going on at the city of Elkhart. That said, there were also 4 staff members that were providing technical assistance and project management to the redevelopment commission. So it's a different, it was just a different level of action and activities. So bringing in some technical assistance is great, but I am very aware that Angola is not the city of Elkhart and vice versa. And so thinking very strategically about getting your plan updated and thinking through logistically, and I just spoke with the mapping guy to start getting some of these GIS layers so that during the next couple months, I see it as a very iterative process that says, okay, we've done some preliminary analysis. I can tell you where your current TIF is, what kind of increment you're gaining off of that TIF, how much you can expect to move forward. Is there any projects? And then we can kind of do an analysis of other areas you might be interested in looking at. What amount of vacant property do you have? Do you have any projects in the prospects in the hopper that you may want to make sure that you go in and make sure that property is included in the TIF area because there's something coming? But is there properties that you don't want to include? The interesting thing about increment is increment works both ways. So when you establish a TIF, it's based on that base assessed value. That's the day that TIF starts. That's what that property is assessed at. And you get the increment off of that. Well, if you have a building that's valued at $1 million and that building needs to be demolished, you go back to just whatever the land value is. And so you have a negative, what's called negative increment. And being very, very strategic about if you're going to get properties that need redeveloped, that you've incorporated that into your plan and understand that that will have a negative impact on your allocation. Because again, it works both ways. So things like that, just helping you come to a decision on what you want to do. And that can be as large or as small as you want. There is some financial benefit to amending the plan to the extent you think you want it to be amended to, as opposed to doing it individually, because each time you do it, there's a legal expense for a legal description. The first thing you have to have is a legal description. That has to be done every time you make an amendment. Then there's the legal notices, and there's legal counsel. I'm a planner by trade, not an attorney. I've had a lot of years of doing that, but it's not my forte. Somebody that's familiar with redevelopment commission law and the statutes that directly are directly applicable to redevelopment commissions really needs to be involved to make sure you're meeting the letter of the law, not only with the plan development and the activities that you say you're going to use your TIF funds for, but also when you get to it, if you decide to move into the incentive component of what a redevelopment commission can do, and providing TIF revenues to pay back loans or grants with redevelopment commission money. So having somebody who's very, very familiar is critical to that. And that feeds a little bit into our spending conversation. So what the contract is, it's technical assistance here to answer whatever questions Retha can come up with, whether it's related directly to redevelopment commission or annexation or other kind of projects that I've been dealing with. I've worked for Avonmarsh for the last 5 years, and as a planner, I do a lot of physical construction work. So we are doing site plans, getting things through engineering, getting things connected to utilities. So I have a lot of practical expertise on what it takes to get a property developed, what those steps look like, and what kind of incentives can bring developers to the table. And then we'd like to do a strategic plan for the redevelopment commission. I see that as an important first step. And in shorthand terms is, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, that's what the strategic plan is supposed to do is, okay, what do we want to do? And then let's identify the steps on how we get to where we want to be. And obviously one of those main components will be reevaluating your current TIF district and what that means and how it's performing. So that's a big part of it. And then the third, that was a big part of it. The third part is thinking through creating a manual and training materials for the redevelopment commission itself. I did this for the City of Elkhart's Redevelopment Commission when I left because I'd been their staff for so long. I just knew everything, and I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. Understanding that it's really important for the commission to kind of understand their roles and responsibilities. And so creating a manual that says, okay, here's our TIF districts. Here's what we say we're going to spend our money on. Here's the statute that says how you can spend that money. And then and also importantly for reporting, there is a whole bunch of report. And again, I started with Redevelopment Commission in 2000. It's been a lot of changes in the law since, over the last almost 25 years. And each time they never take away reporting requirements. They just add to them, and making sure you have a good schedule of when those reports are due, the information the Redevelopment Commission needs to provide to not only the mayor, but also the council. Those are required. They have just put a few more guidelines associated with how that can be done now. So there's about 6 touch points through DLGF throughout every year. And then
That Ryan does that I didn't even really realize. I knew he did this report, but yeah, he has to send all of that in. And then the LGF came up with this new spending plan, which is basically a budget.
Yeah.
I think I was overthinking at first on exactly, oh my gosh, like we are going to be tied to this. It's really just a budget that we have to come up with to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. It can be amended. We just have to send in, Ryan has to send in every time they amend or something, but it can be amended. It's just, this is a budget saying, hey, this is what we think we're going to do. And I want to quickly reiterate when she talked about other legal counsel, we have Kim Schaub, clearly our city attorney, who handles everything. Kim will sometimes say to us, because when we're looking at some of these agreements, we can come up with specific agreements on how, if we're going to give this to you, what are you going to give back to us? And what does that look like? And we can come up with those things. Kim may say, hey, and we always go to Kim first. Hey, you might want to talk to somebody else about this and make sure this is clear or whatever. And so that goes through Kim. We don't ever hire outside counsel for redevelopment or anything without going through our city attorney. So when she was talking about that, I wanted you guys to know that we utilize Kim for everything. It's just the mayor, sometimes we use a different annexation attorney or whatever. So Kim may say, hey, you guys are talking about this. I think you should grab him to look at this or to write this up or whatever. And so those expenses are going to be part of the spending plan. And we just want to make sure that they're covered when we create that budget in case we need to use them. Does that make sense, Kim? Do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay. Did I say it okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, there are just certain things that are beyond my expertise. So, yep, in that case, I bring in a professional.
Yes.
especially when you get into the kind of the TIF incentive. I mean, there's people who specialize in that. And the development agreement, and I've seen it in other communities, if you don't get the development agreement right, they never let you negotiate it back to your benefit. So you got one shot at this especially when right now you're not providing incentives. So you haven't had to concern yourself with that. But it's an incentive tool, but it's yours to wield. And so you need to make sure that you're using that power to create the best benefit for the community you can. And so people with a little more experience that have done these deals in other communities and know how much to push developers and not, sometimes the developers just can say, well, I need it, or I'm just not coming. And then, but sometimes it's like, well, are you really not going to come?
And do you really need it?
Do you really need it?
And if we do this, what can you partner with us? And again, we're not trying to, we want to do some more public-private partnership with our developers. And Chuck, you had said at the last meeting about bringing some developers in and looking at what, or maybe Eric said it, I don't know, somebody did, about what they need, what they're looking at, what they need in this ground. What can we do some prepping of some of these vacant lands and get them ready? You know, what can we utilize some of this for? And so, but also in saying that, we could say, hey, we're willing to do this, but can you make sure that your sidewalk goes an extra 100 feet to connect in, or what can you do back? And so we can set those parameters in some of these agreements. And again, we've never done it. So to set those agreements and to set those parameters on what makes sense and what's actually feasible for developers and what they're really looking for, what they really need to develop. Because we all know right now, costs of infrastructure, costs of building, it's crazy. If we don't start doing some partnership, we're not going to get this development coming here. And so we have to be willing to do that. And we want to do that, but we want those parameters to be set that make sense. And so I think that with Crystal's knowledge and her experience, she can help us look at what some of that is. So as we're just looking through, and Crystal, if you want to kind of go just line by line and tell us maybe what that means and what we can get. We might be able to shore this up tonight without a special meeting later this month, but I want to talk about, I know we had a question for Baker Tilly though.
I looked and I think we're going to be fine. So, the spending plan is really, I think, a reaction to a lot of redevelopment commissions that were not providing budgets. So it's kind of your precursor to a budget. So I think as we go through kind of your strategic planning, we will put in and build in a budgeting process for the commission moving forward. You don't have that now. So this is kind of putting the line in the sand. This is what we're doing as of today. And again, it does have to be uploaded to DLGF. And anytime you change from it, the statute clearly says this is how you're going to spend the money. It doesn't say, and it also clearly states, if you need to change, you just got to upload it to DLGF. This is all about their intention to have transparency. And so the DLGF is the Department of Local Government Finance. And so there's a portal. You as a taxpayer can go on there. And the intention is that you get to see the financial machinations of your community. And there's a whole series, these reports go up there and people can search them and find out about what's going on in their community. That's the intention of all this. It's not to make more work. It's hopefully to help us think through the process. But that's really the intent, is because, you know, TIF's had a bad rap for a lot of years. I think it's becoming less so, especially since school corporations now are not fighting TIFs all the time. But it's really important for that transparency's sake. And so I have a feeling that, again, we want to build an annual calendar of things that we need to do. And this is always going to be one to do in the fall. Hopefully next year we will have gone through the budget cycle with the city's budget cycle and think through that. So by the time we get to this piece, you will have already done it all. You will
Our
have
budget cycle is July, or wait, what's our budget cycle, Ryan?
Usually start in July.
Yep.
Okay.
So, yep. So so again, you have that no excess TIF letter that has to go out every year. That should be based on your budget. So again, it should fit very neatly into the same budget cycle with the city. And that's how every time I provide technical assistance to communities, I tell them that's your best process. You've got to do this work anyways. You've got these reports for DLGF. Let it be your mile markers and help you manage your projects and your funds moving forward. So that said, today you have an obligation for the spending plan. And I think you got a paper copy of what that looks, what those categories look like. I don't know if that one's the one from Baker Tilly or Barnes and Thornburg, but it's interesting because you got one that was created by an attorney and one was created by an accountant. And one's in an Excel spreadsheet and one's a big long document. And I'm not going to tell you which one's which, but I think we'll probably figure it out. So I'm using the one that's from the Excel spreadsheet because that's easy for me. So you've got several categories. Some things that are not applicable for you right now, would be bond proceeds, because you aren't receiving any bond proceeds.
Can I ask a question before we get into this?
Yep.
Two things. One, we're doing this because we have to spend a certain amount. Do we know what that amount is or what that is? And secondly, we have to amend before we can spend money anyways, correct? So how does that
Well-
chicken and egg comes first here? Because we can't spend it. I mean,
No, I
am I
asked.
right on that?
You are, and that's a great question, which I asked Baker Tilly,
Okay.
which is our financial, how do we define them? They are kind of who does
I know.
our financial makeup. Okay. So I asked him, I said, our initial plan right now is very limited. It's very restrictive on what we can do. So can we put items in our spending plan for next year that are not in our current plan? And he said, yes, you can.
Okay.
This is because part of the spending is going to be amending our plan. So he's like, you can put whatever you want in there and it doesn't matter. So, and then what was your first question about the money?
Percentage wise, there was a limit or something we have to show that we're actively spending or?
So there's the no excess TIF. And it's set at 200%. So when you send a letter that says we will have no excess TIF, which means we're going to utilize all of our TIF, first of all, it's only that year's allocation. So it looks like you collect what,
140.
So when
about
Brian,
140 a year.
by June, Brian usually comes and he presents this and he says, we take a vote that we're not going to use any of our excess TIF. So that's that.
You're saying that we are not going to have any excess TIF. That does not account for everything you've got in the bank. That's only that next year's allocation. So when you did it in July of this year, you were pretty much saying, as of January 1, any revenue we're going to collect, we're going to spend in that year. So we're not going to have any extra. Now, before you could just say that. A couple cycles ago, they said, we're going to tell you what means excess TIF. So right now it's 200% of your annual allocation. So you would have to collect more than 200% of your annual allocation. And then at that point, it says, all right, you have excess TIF. You have to distribute it back. Tell us how you're going to distribute it back to the other entities that the TIF is coming from. So you can always say it, but honestly, there should be some thought behind it. That says, okay, we really do have these things we're going to spend the money on this year. And that's why we want to start that. That to me is a really good hope to say, all right, let's start thinking about money because we've got to do this for this report that's due. So let's start thinking about it. And it happens to work pretty well with most municipal budget cycles. It's like people are all starting to think about money in June and July.
And I think that we've all said the same thing. We have never utilized any of this the way maybe we should. And so I think that part of this, I think other communities were doing the same thing that we're doing.
Yes.
No, we have no access.
They wouldn't have passed a law if it was just you.
Actually, what we're saying is we're gonna keep the TIF money, not that we're gonna spend it. That's what we've said up to this point with the.
Up to this point, you're absolutely right, John.
You're
Yes.
accumulating to do a project at some point in time.
Yep.
But no longer,
So we're
we
building
can't
this up.
accumulate more than 200%. Is that what you're saying? Or-
No, it's again, so you got cash in the bank. You got cash in the bank. That no excess TIF is only for the next year. So you can anticipate you're going to collect $140,000. That letter says is that we're going to use that money. We're not going to have 200 times that amount. We're not going to collect that. So if you were to collect, say, $350,000, then you have excess TIF, right? Doesn't mean you have to give it back. It just means now you have to figure out how to spend it.
So
And that's why the
communities
budget-
are just going nope, and they're just banking all their money and not having a plan on what to do with it, which is what we have done. So the DLGF is like, okay, we're kind of tired of that.
200% of what again?
Your annual allocation,
What is our annual allocation?
140 or something.
About 140, yeah.
Can I ask a question too? I'm gonna go down a different direction. I'm gonna go down the spending direction.
Welcome to our banker on the board. He keeps us in line.
I'll make a long story short, but I've got a couple of really big investors in Fort Wayne that are currently doing, I don't know if you know where Lowe's is at on Lima Road in Fort Wayne, but there's a new project going in right next to it, right to the north. 10 or 15, $20 million project. They did the one right next to that, which is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of L3 Harris. That's a $50 to $75 million project. These people have met with, I know them and I brought them up here to talk to the mayor. They've talked to the mayor and they would be willing to put up a couple of 100,000 square foot buildings out here next to the hotel. What they typically ask for is we'll we'll do all the financing. We'll get bank financing. What we ask of the city is you pay 2 years worth of interest on the bank note. And then you have a forever tax. You can TIF them forever. You can tax them forever. I've got a couple of questions around that. One, would that money fall under debt service
Depends on how you structure that.
under the redevelopment commission?
It depends on how you structure that loan payment. We were having this conversation. So TIF in general, and Tim, speak up if you want to, but in layman's terms, TIF can only be used for a local public improvement. That's the terminology that's in the TIF legislation that says it's a local public improvement. So how do you make it a public improvement? The city has to have some legal attachment to that project, whether it's a lease agreement, a loan agreement, whatever it is, there has to be some legal binding you to the property to do any work on a private. That's why these public-private partnerships work out well. And they're usually based on some sort of a low interest loan, some sort, and then the TIF is used to pay that loan back.
So like if we owned that property where they want to put the shell building, that's a legal attachment.
Yeah, and at that
we would
point, you
have.
could do the infrastructure. So other commissions that actually own property.
Why don't we write them a
will do
loan
site
for the interest at 0%?
That's what she's saying.
Yeah, you have
Is that what
to-
you're saying?
Yeah, you can't do that.
No.
The economic development, so again, when we'll go through this when we talk about roles and responsibilities of a redevelopment commission. You can pay back a loan, that's your debt service. You can't issue the loan. The Economic Development Commission has to do that.
Which we have with the city that is rarely active because they only have a couple of responsibilities. So to your point, Mark, that would be part of, let's amend what we can do with our money, our plan to allow us to do some things like that for investors. Let's amend that so we can do that. And then how that works is probably what Eric just said.
As a planner, does it, to me, it's a no-brainer, but I'm asking you, as a planner, does it make sense to pay a developer's interest on a loan for 2 years if you're going to tax them on that property forever?
You won't get it forever, first of all. Remember, once you issue a bond, once you issue debt, which a loan is debt, once you issue that, then your clock starts ticking. Now you've triggered your expiration for your TIF. You haven't done that yet because you haven't taken on any debt.
I don't want to go through that with us because we haven't done that.
Yeah.
So
So,
explain that, please.
so depending on when the TIF was established, it's either a 20 or a 25-year life cycle for the TIF.
Okay.
And it will expire. Now, that said, you can have multiple allocation areas within a TIF that have different expiration dates. We're not going to get into that tonight. But that said, so you're triggering. The other thing I would just say is before you jump into an incentive position, get some guidelines that says, here's our application. This is when we provided incentives. These are the incentives we feel comfortable providing. And these are the mechanisms we use to do that. And I would be darn sure that somebody's making sure that they actually need it and it's not just they want it. So that's the other key with incentives is that you shouldn't provide incentives above and beyond what anybody ever actually needs. And so that means looking at performas and to say, hey, you know what, this would work for us except for this. There's this gap, called gap financing, or there's an issue with why I'm not just doing this. I think it's a good idea and I'm willing to put some money up why am I not willing to put all the money up? And there should be a reason. And we talked about that a little bit today too, is once that information gets provided to the city, it becomes it's a public record. So making sure that you have some third-party folks to, when and if you get into the incentive game, having it set up for a trusted third party to review financials, making sure these LLCs actually have something behind them, whether that's a personal guarantee, that the entity you're working with is a legal, and secondly, has the ability to complete the project as they are telling you they're going to. And then thirdly, whether they actually need the incentive.
And part of the TIF is that I think it's supposed to be used this way, and I don't know if it has to be used this way, but my thought is we want to put that money in there. And that's a great idea. I'm just saying, if we are going to do that, we need to say, hey, this development is not going to happen unless we do something to help them, unless we partner, unless we incentivize, unless we give them something, nothing is going to happen. And so looking at what area you're talking about or other redevelopment areas or other vacant lots, man, if we don't prep this and get some infrastructure to it, or if we're not ready, nothing's going to ever happen there. That's what TIF should be used for. But again, yes, it can be written up that we could say, hey, you're willing to do this for us? We need this. We'll pay that loan or whatever that looks like. And that's a good way to look at it as well.
These guys have done tons and tons of stuff in Fort Wayne. And that's what they've done with Mayor Henry down there before he died, obviously, is they get a couple years worth of interest paid, and then, they lease the building out or sell the building or whatever it is. And their comment is, and the more I've got to thinking about this, I buy it. And they've said they field at least one call a week from somebody looking for space in northern Indiana. And they don't want to come look at ground. These people don't want to come look at bare ground that can be built in a year or a year and a half.
Oh, they're ready now.
They want to see a building and they want it finished in 60 days and they're ready to move in. Hence the reason we probably need the shell buildings.
So yeah, these are exactly the kind of incentives that redevelopment commissions can help with. If it's in your plan, because it does need to be done there, and the looping it back to the spending plan. The question is I think when the spending plan goes, there may be a follow-up. I don't know how much if anybody's looking, or if it's just it got submitted, check the box, it's done, or if somebody's actually reviewing these at this date. I don't know. They don't know yet. This is a brand new rule. It's the first time it's required. But making sure that it's clear, at least locally, that the intent is to amend the plan to allow the things that are in your spending plan. Things like, and when we were kind of doing a rough number today, my computer just died, so I can't see what I'm looking at. But one of the first things was we did put some money in that debt service, assuming at some point during 2025, a loan, whether it's a little one to just try to, get your feet wet, figure out how this works. It doesn't have to be millions and millions of dollars, but a small one might be a nice way. It's low risk, somebody you're comfortable with. Just get everybody kind of comfortable with what that process looks like. Getting the Economic Development Commission into the loop and figuring out kind of, hey, this is how this would proceed. So we did put some funds in the capital, in the spending plan.
I think you can plug in.
I plugged in, I don't know, it's
Maybe those.
it's.
So while she's doing that, you mentioned chicken and egg.
Sure.
There's a lot of that right here. So this is a really fundamental question. Where does the money come from for this spending plan?
From this report that you just got.
For 888,000.
Okay.
886.
So I'm back to this amendment thing. So getting the spending plan in checks the box on the requirement, But the next thing, when you think about chicken and egg, is we gotta do the amendment.
Yes,
Because we can't do any of this stuff the way we're set up today.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely, Chuck. You're right. And it is kind of confusing. This spending plan is just really is a new rule that they
Well, and it's
came
the
up
first
with.
time.
And
It's not gonna be the final.
No.
I think we all should just think about that, right? It's not a budget.
We
it's a
can
spending
amend
plan.
this.
I got it.
Yeah, it's a budget, but it is absolutely amendable on nonstop. And so what we are looking at is saying, okay, so
Is there a reason that it has to say anything other than zero?
Well,
If we're just gonna.
we have to show the DLGF that we are utilizing these funds.
that's where that percentage came in.
Or it's gonna say,
Well, it's going to trigger all kinds of red, yes, you can say we're not going to spend any money, but that's not, I don't think that's the case. Because you have to spend money to amend the
We're gonna have
TIF plan.
professional expenses. We have to
I
have
mean,
professional expenses for
yeah.
sure. We know that.
Absolutely. And.
So we put in what we know.
We know we have to put, I mean, that's the place to start. That's the
But
only
yeah.
thing we know we have to have.
Are we
that I can
required to
see.
spend all the 140? I guess that's where I'm hung up.
Well, so.
100%, but
How much money
So there's two things. So the spending plan is actually the 886. Your no excess TIF is your annual allocation. So they're two separate reports. They're asking two separate questions. But that said, because you haven't spent money, so you get about 140,000 a year.
right.
So at this point, they are saying, based on the current information you know, which is
888,000.
886, or yeah, 888, this number right here, that should be your goal for spending. Now, you're not required to spend all of it. But understand if you don't put it in this budget now, you're going to be amending one way or the other. Very
So these, we accrue like almost 140 every year from the taxes.
Right.
So,
So I guess that was my thing.
Yeah.
If we bring in 140, do we have to show that we're spending 140 every year? Or where do we accrue
We-
funds from, I guess?
No, you don't have to, because otherwise you'd be in hot water because you got 888,000.
Well, we're getting in hot water
So
now.
it's
'cause I'm done
confusing.
with it.
Well,
it is confusing because we just
Yeah,
basically
you
have to
gotta
say,
have a
we
plan.
know
It
we
raises
have all
the
this
flag
money.
within the
Yes.
new
This is what we want
guidelines.
to use it
Yep,
for.
yep, yep. And so, again, I would say, if you're using this as a tool,
Professional expenses.
Let's try to budget it out to the 888, 752.66, which is your current, as of October 31st, that's your fund balance. That's what you have in the bank.
Expenses.
I would not anticipate any new revenue. I wouldn't bring in the 2025 quite yet. Because you never know if it's actually coming. Generally speaking, you'll get it in two allocations, one in January and one in July. Those are like a month after taxes are due or whatever. So you'll get two allocations next year, about 70,000 apiece. I wouldn't bring those in yet because those are actually only if they collect the money. So the county isn't going to give you TIF revenue if the taxes don't get paid. So you can think about it, but I think you have ample now to put the spending plan together with the 880. You might want to round it up to 900,000, just to make it easy math.
So this spending plan is for 2025,
Yes.
and we're making a spending plan to completely deplete all of our funds. Is that what you just said?
The spending plan is telling you how you can spend it. So if you put $500,000 in professional services, that just means 500,000 doesn't mean you're going to spend all of it, but that's saying that's what you can spend that 500,000.
So every year they want us to know that we're going to potentially, we have the opportunity to completely deplete.
Yes, but you don't have to.
Okay.
But if you think about construction out,
So this isn't so much a plan as this is the maximum amount. we're
Yes.
spending Without changing it.
We're putting them in little
Yes.
jars.
Yeah, so like some people do that with their budgets, they have this is this money, this is this money.
Everything in a
We're
different-
creating envelopes.
Got it.
if you would ever approve, if we would ever have somebody build these two buildings out here, and you're talking $10 million, and they put their 30% in it, and they're doing a loan for $7 million, 6% of $7 million a year is $420,000. You could eat this money up very quick.
So, and
I got one more question around
yeah, go ahead.
that. I personally feel like if we're ever really going to get serious about redevelopment, we need to do some of these things. That's just my opinion. If we ever decide we want to do it though, how big of a headache is it going to be with NIPSCO? Because we can get them to come in and build. Are they gonna be able to get power?
They'll be able to get power for the same amount that we're paying our interest for is what that'll come out to be. It'll be a break even for them. But if we pay interest at 400, it's gonna cost them that plus some to get gas to there. That's
So-
just the reality of it.
Crystal's probably not aware, we are having an issue with
You're not the only.
NIPSCO right now. There are some other ones in Indiana that are struggling with NIPSCO. And so right now NIPSCO is basically like,
Do they only do
Oh.
gas or they do gas?
They do
Gas is our shortage today. Electric will be within a couple of years.
It is broker.
Talking about.
so right now we go, hey, we have this great housing subdivision that wants to come in, and we send to NIPSCO and say, can you supply gas to this area for 58 homes? And NIPSCO goes, oh, sure, but you're gonna pay us this much to get it to you right now. And I had never thought about, I don't know that it should be or could be used for that, but so at this point, we have lost a couple subdivisions, I'll be honest, and a couple other extra developments because NIPSCO goes, there's a shortage and you have to cover this. And the city is not covering all of that. We can't afford to do that. So the developer goes, you want me to pay 500,000 to get this, I can't do that, and they're out. So it's an obstacle right now for development. That's not wrong, Mark, and that is a good.
Well, I guess my question is around, they're pushing me pretty hard. I've got them in front of a builder. I've got them in front of the mayor. They're ready to go. But I don't want to put a lot of work in this if it's not,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, no.
If it's-
I mean-
So
if NIPSCO's gonna,
Will be a delay. It will be a delay and it will be a cost. I can just about guarantee that unless they have you got gas out there prepped, but I would be very surprised if that was.
And that could be, so I don't know if anybody's contacted NIPSCO yet on that project or said, hey,
I don't think, no.
if we're building this 20,000 square foot building, whatever, I don't know, like, what does that look like? So I don't know if those numbers have been thrown out. It could be that they go, hey, I think we're good. Or it could be,
I've not seen one less than 500,000 recently for a building of that. Now, have they talked to the builder that has the property out there?
Yep.
Okay. Because that's gonna be that'll be the other.
Yeah.
Hold up.
so yeah, I think it's worth looking at. It's worth talking to NIPSCO. It's worth getting this. And we have a contact that we say, hey, we're looking at this happening and what is that going to cost? We can get those numbers fairly, I don't know, I want to say quickly, but it doesn't take forever from NIPSCO. And so we can do that on some of these.
And then the other question actually becomes is that a better incentive than interest?
So another thing,
So-
the way NIPSCO works on that too, Mark, it would be something else to think about, especially out at that property. The way, and it's kind of asinine, but the way it works is if you call in and say, I got a potential property that I want to do a project and they figure out how much gas it's going to take, they put it over here. And if I call, I'm the neighbor next door, they put it over here and they don't look at them cumulative. So if you were to have 2 or 3 projects going on that same property, they do not look at it cumulatively. Now, if it was a group project and they just don't, that's their, because they say, hey, this guy might not go this way. But if you could group multiple projects together, you could absorb that cost down quite a ways. Does that make
Makes
sense?
sense. Yeah. Does make sense.
Well, and then
That could be a potential way. And the other, we can't in this case, and you can speak to this, but another way on that interest in those things is the city can hold that property through construction and avoid that, that's a 1.5-year project. They can avoid all taxes during that process too. And we've even talked about running material through the city on some of those projects. And there's other
The
creative ways. to
EDC
save some-
has offered some of that as well. So
Yeah,
there's,
EDC, I should say, it's
Yeah.
offered through the nonprofits have this running stuff. So there's some other creative ways to get the same dollars as well.
Makes sense.
so I think we can work some of that, but so that we're not here all night.
Yeah, so we need to get to 800.
We just need to, so we know that if you want to start, Crystal, with debt service, like we are looking at possibly that, once we amend our plan, that some of this could happen, Mark, or whatever, that we're willing to say, hey, let's do a loan and let's do this. Like, is your computer still dead?
honestly.
I don't remember.
Kinda
Do you remember the
scary because-
numbers?
Yeah,
Okay.
so debt service, we chunked in at 100,000, just nice, again, just nice round numbers. The next one down, I think, was professional services.
Here, I'll give you this. Sorry.
And again, these are,
Ron proceeds lease.
yeah, there's a lot of these that just aren't applicable for you at this point in time.
Yes, which is one of them, sorry.
Capital expenditures allowed in the economic development or redevelopment plan. This assumes that you're going to be amending the plan to add capital improvements. So we put 200,000 in there. So that would be actual city projects, whether we're putting in sidewalks, we're putting in a park, anything that would be physical construction
And
type
these are
projects.
just brainstorm numbers that we kind of threw out earlier looking at this. So please, if you guys are
Got
like, hey,
We got it.
And then professional expenses, not just for me, but for a slew of people who might get involved. Obviously, if any of these deals go through, you have to have Baker Tilly come in and do the financial evaluation for them. So it's Baker Tilly, it's if you end
legal
up
descriptions.
legal descriptions for a survey, writing the plan itself, any of these, if you're, again, I'm going to take a little divergent. That's one of the reasons that when the mayor and I talked this afternoon about whether you should do new TIFs or an expansion of your existing TIF is that if you do a new TIF, you can't use any of these funds to do it.
Right.
You can use these funds to expand or amend your existing TIF.
Does the trigger date start the same though? So if we issue debt service bond and we add a new TIF, and it's all spidered together, is that the same trigger date for that? So now we're down to less
So
years?
interestingly enough, there's actually a two-step process. And generally speaking, like your TIF right now, your economic development area and your allocation area are the same boundary. They don't have to be. So generally, when you think about all these developer public-private partnerships, you have your TIF area. And then you have internal allocation areas, and the allocation area is what's triggered by that debt payment.
Perfect.
So that's why I said you can have multiple allocation areas within a TIF that have different expiration dates.
That's what I was just
That's
gonna
what- that's
say.
what
It
matters.
can roll out, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll confirm all that. Again, that's why it's great to have, somebody look at the plans. There's a whole process. There's 4 meetings anytime you do anything to your TIF plan. So there's 4 meetings that we have to go through.
So basically professional expenses is really high. And what do
We
we
put
put
in 500,000. Again, this is a max, not an actual. And again, most of those you will get a contract when those come through. So it's not like you're giving Retha $500,000 to go play with. Each one of these will be, and again, I assume you guys do an appropriation process. So even
Yes.
if you have a budget, it's a planning budget, not an allocation budget. So anytime you would actually have an expense, you'd get the contract in advance, approve that before an expenditure could occur.
So I allocated money out of my budget right now, not TIF, for Avonmarsh. That comes out of my professional services budget that I have. Now, as we get going, I allocated 40,000. As we get going, this is probably going to exceed that. And the mayor said he would like me not to use that out of my budget and to use this money to further on as we keep going. So that's what that's about right now in full transparency.
And then the next line, grant and contributions, that is if you're receiving any funds from federal or state, that you're getting a grant and then you're expending it back out to people. So it's not, in this case, they're looking at all revenue sources, not just your allocation. So some redevelopment commissions lease property, and so you get your lease payments every year. Those are not subject to the TIF rules, so it's a really great opportunity to provide funds to do things that aren't TIF eligible. You don't have that, so those aren't there. But one new one, which the mayor's really excited about, is the police and fire capital and operation expenses. So interesting thing about this, first of all, operating expenses have never been allowed with TIF revenue. Just maintenance and operations are just not what they're supposed to be about. They've made this change this year that will allow you to pay for operational expenses for public services, pretty much, as well as capital improvements, which we're always.
And that'd be like an ongoing basis then,
Yes.
year after year.
So
Certain
he-
percentage.
Yep. I put in the remainder, the 888.76 in that budget. And that's because we haven't gotten any actual budget. A great way to use that funds is if you want to make some sort of a collaboration or coordination with the TIF area, as you expand it, you could say, hey, we want to offset the cost for one police officer to serve the TIF areas, anything like that. Or, hey, they need capital improvements. We need to make some sort of building improvement for the police or fire department. So again, those funds are there as a maximum to start the conversation. I'm sure the police and fire department would be happy to figure out somehow to spend that money for you.
Yeah.
So,
And that said as well, you can take that up to 100,000 and have it just a nice round 900 if you want. I assume you're going to get at least a portion of that 2025 money. That's not a big, to assume you're going to be getting $15,000 is not a huge jump.
so should we do that or should we put some, and I don't know, I know that it doesn't totally matter, but other anticipated expenses or, we've never
So
done anything.
it would be things that are not any one of those other categories. And one thing that, again, we can talk about when we get through the budget cycle is you can pay for project management, whether that's city staff or consultants. They fit in a different line item. They're not professional services if it's a city staff. That would go under those others, which is staff fees.
Can you tell me quick, like educational training and employee training expenses?
Those are two new eligible activities. And again, I'm not sure anybody's actually done them yet. So that'll be one that I think we watch. So you can provide a grant, I think it's up to 15% of your annual allocation to the school corporations to provide technical training pretty much. Something that, but it's a really interesting idea, but I think again, it's one of those you want to set up a program before you allocate funds to it. Because you need to know how they're going to use it and sitting down with them to say, okay, now we can do this. Because again, I think this is a result of the school corporations and the police and fire departments saying, hey, you're tipping these areas and taking all the revenue that would support us. So this is saying, okay, well, redevelopment commissions, if you choose to work with these entities, you can provide some of your funds to offset police and fire. And you can provide, under certain guidelines, some assistance to schools to help with economic development, i.e. job training. But again, those are things that you've
Would that be
got to have a
program
policy.
institute or?
So these would then be things
What
like. in the
about your
pathway
fire
programs.
training program you have?
Oh, yes. So we started that, yes.
All the new pathways.
Yeah.
So if you have some options, the first thing is to get the materials together, then we sit down with the statute to say, okay, it's written pretty broadly. So we add that, it has to be in your TIF plan though, remember? So if these are things you want to do, we need to make sure they get in your TIF plan moving forward. And you can add it to the TIF plan even if you don't have a project in place
So
yet.
that's something we can come back once we understand.
Allows you to kind of think through and honestly see what other people are doing. Like, hey, this is brand new. Nobody's doing this yet. This is the first time that these are going to start cycling through redevelopment commissions, just to see what kind of interesting things that might be available.
So one question I had was the budget that you've talked about comes up to the 888,750. What about the income from next year?
Yeah.
Saying that we don't want to put it in there because what if everybody out there doesn't pay taxes next year?
Oh, okay.
I shortened it up, but that's what you were saying, right?
Yep. And again, I don't feel like you're obligated to include it because it says based on current information. What do you know right now? What you know right now is the 888.
Got it.
And again, the likelihood of you amending this over the next 12 months is probably pretty high. And at that point, if you choose to incorporate the 25 allocation, you can do that too.
So are you guys comfortable with the police fire capital doing the rest of the 88? Where's my report? 88,752? I mean, or,
As a filler for right now.
okay.
I mean, looking at the rest of the lines as they stand, I would say that would be reasonably accepted.
Okay. All right.
When in essence, it just doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, it really
I
doesn't.
mean, it just doesn't matter.
Well, it matters in the fact that it's forced you to have this conversation.
Yeah.
It matters in the fact that it's going to be a publicly searchable document for your constituents to go in and look. And I think it's a really good, sometimes you just gotta poke people to get them moving. So it's a really good way to jumpstart what I hope is an exciting 2025.
And it's not a bad thought on, as we grow and our community grows, or we get these new buildings, it's gonna require more police services and more equipment. So that is not a bad thing. I love the idea of possibly doing something educational wise with the school or pathways. Like I love that as well. So I think that there's
Awesome lifeguard program we're gonna want to do.
at the Y.
At the school.
Got you.
There's somewhere to spend some money.
Yeah. And I love that. Like, I think that we keep talking about partnerships. Oh, we're gonna do this. What are you gonna do for us? Well, I think as a board, if we have the ability or the options to give back, I think that that's okay for us to give back a little bit somewhere. So I don't think that that's a bad thing, but this gives us a great basis and a great start. It makes sense to me. I mean, we can.
Well, there's no limit on how many times you change this. It's
No,
just an upload. I heard you say
Exactly.
there's no money involved. It's just an upload.
Yeah, you're right.
That's
This is
nice.
another guide to kind of help you as you're thinking through your strategic plan.
It's an upload that's as a public document.
Mhm.
Nobody knows where it's at.
So, but it also is, I mean, we're saying, okay, this doesn't matter, but realistically, we kind of do, we kind of have a thought process and a plan. And if DLGF says, hey, I want you to explain why you're doing this, we can say, well, this is what we want to do. And it does make sense.
I will tell you, I'm not making an argument, but it makes very little sense planning to outside of our debt service, capital expenditures, any of that.
Yeah.
In the first couple of years, the tagging out March. I'm okay with this. I'm not saying no, but the reality is none of that should go towards police, fire, anything like that until there is
A good plan in
sufficient
place.
fund to replace that. So, I mean.
I mean,
just
we
on the
can
record
switch it up
to say-
if you want.
No, I'm not saying we need to because it doesn't.
I know.
We could just switch it up at the next meeting.
This looks very good on that public. That looks good for the public.
But yeah, you're right. When we come up with our plan, when we are ready and established and we feel like, then if people are coming to us and they're asking, we can be like, oh, well, do you meet this criteria? And this is what we can do for you. And there's no question. It's not, we're gonna do this for one and this for another. And oh, this guy's gonna only get this much. If they meet this criteria, we're gonna have a plan. And I feel super good about that. I love that it falls into some categories versus us like, no allocation. What are we gonna do this year? Nothing. Okay, I'm done with that. So if you guys are good with this, I think that if our chairman wants to take a motion to approve, we can do that here, and then we don't have to worry about this part of it. And then we can kind of talk about what will happen in our next meeting. So
So unless there are other questions or concerns, I'm opening the floor up to taking, I'll call a nomination for the TIF annual spending plan that we just created.
I'll nominate that we move forward with the spending plan for 2025.
Second,
who seconded?
waiting on a second yet.
John second. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nay? It passed.
Okay. All right, so we will get this I'll type it in to the format that they were requesting and get it to Ryan, and he will upload this to the DLGF portal.
Just a silly question here because I know the select format, so I wasn't sure when I read that what that meant.
That
I
was,
think I understand now.
Yes.
that This is the Excel.
I just printed off this one format for all of us. There
Okay.
were, like she said, there were a couple different formats that were sent to us that we could use. I just
I
selected
mean, it's
this.
basic, so
Yeah, I don't
It
think,
works.
yeah.
It has the same criteria in both. One's just
okay.
longer than the other one.
So did we have to agree on the format too, or?
No,
we
I think
accepted- We accepted the plan and the format
Yes.
at the same time.
Yep, I think
Okay.
that's good. Thank you. And so we will not need to, your number 7, schedule a meeting for November. But I think we can, and Crystal and I will work on coming up an action plan for our December meeting.
Amendment, that's the next thing then.
Yeah, is amending our existing plan. And Crystal, can you, Eric, do you have a question?
Can you guys have been working together, but I mean, time is huge, especially in projects like you're talking, there's a lot of those out there right now. Can we get a email stream going of ideas of things that you think you guys would like to add into that amendment ideas so that we can at least be thinking through that before we meet the next time and we can add to those? That way we don't come with a whole bunch of things that we haven't thought about. Is that fair to say?
Or getting them hit the first.
And
Seeing here.
actually what I can do is, send you a list of things that are commonly in redevelopment.
We don't do
plans.
common, we're gonna be creative.
Kim, can I
So-
send a group, like an email? I mean, I send agendas and minutes and things to this board. Can we have like a string of emails going back and forth legally that we can do that's not in a public setting?
Considerations and not, as far as we're transparent.
You want to be careful not to discuss and deliberate and decide in an email.
Outside of, yeah.
No recommendations, considerations.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
So it's just information purposes if we're sending out things.
Yes.
Okay,
Or highlights to be discussed or.
yes. And Crystal and I will work on some of that, but yes,
Essentially appear on an agenda anyway,
yes,
the information that
yes.
we were discussing.
Yes. And those next, and we will talk about the next action item, like you are right, amending this plan is going to be huge. Another action item, and Caroline, I'm sorry, every time I do this, I attack you, is we need to at least get an idea of the boundaries of where we want to, if we're going to spider our TIF, if you guys think that that's the best option, I will tell you that I found these that you guys had looked at. I think when Jennifer first came on in 2022, maybe we kind of talked about this then a little bit. Hey, let's expand. Let's do something here. Let's get some higher density housing. We talked about that. I think we had another one that you guys had done, and it was kind of the same thing. Do we go to the south? You know, what does this look like? So along with Mark's discussion, we have some things that potentially could be happening in the downtown pretty soon. And so with that, we had talked about tipping some areas of our downtown. So at our next meeting, I anticipate that we're going to look at action items for amending our plan and potential boundary lines of what you think to either spider, or if you guys, when we understand that term and what makes sense, which it makes sense to me, but do we do that? Are we looking at separate TIF districts, what we want to do? I do want to throw in something else, and there's a new, something called the residential TIF. We have 0 residential TIF areas right now. And Crystal, can you just pop, I know we're running on time and I appreciate you guys being patient. And we don't even have to talk about it now. It's just, that's something else that we are going to want to look at. And that would be very beneficial for like mixed developments. So let's say we had a piece of property and somebody's doing some single family housing and they're going to throw some townhouses in and maybe a multifamily apartment complex or something else in that whole area. That's where residential TIF makes a lot of sense, because you can start collecting on some of those things that aren't just the single family housing. And so that those mixed developments and some other areas that are beneficial to do residential TIFs, we might start looking at some of that too.
Is the residential TIF something, a new concept that's out there, or is it in our old manual?
It was established, I think, probably 2 or 3 years ago. It isn't very old, and the real benefit is, so just FYI, TIFs do not collect unless it's a very, very old TIF. In the very beginning, you were able to do it. Anything that's considered single family, that 1%er, those 1% tax, you don't collect those, even if they're in your TIF district under a economic development TIF. So it's just lost revenue. The residential TIF allows you to capture that area. So what it does is that if you have an area like, whether it's new or old, it doesn't particularly matter. You can establish a residential TIF, which allows you then to collect that 1%, which you wouldn't be collecting if you established an economic development TIF, which you only get the 2 and 3%ers there. Because there's this big incentive to provide more single-family homes. So it could be, a single-family detached. It could be a condominium unit. Those are still considered single-family and they're taxed at 1%, even though they're in a condo, because they have sole ownership. You know what I mean? So it's.
How does the homestead tie into that?
It's generally the homestead is
The 1%.
is the 1%ers.
And there was something tied into the schools on this residential too, right? Because we don't want to bring in a whole bunch. Kevin's going to throw stuff. If we bring a bunch of people into the county and he's not collecting anything off of it, I mean, how did that tie
So
in?
actually, in the very beginning, they've amended this law. So it's been through 2 cycles already. So in the beginning, you actually had to have an approval by the school board to establish a residential TIF.
Right.
They've removed that, but in exchange for that, the maximum timeline on a residential TIF is 15 years now, regardless of what your bond is.
But part of that is that the schools get money now for, the mayor always says butts in the seats. Like that's what the pupils and the number. So the schools, where it used to be a perception that you're taking away from them, when you are bringing residential in, when you're bringing development in, you're bringing families in, you're bringing children that are going to attend our schools. And that's what the schools want. They need those children there. So it's not the same perception.
I think I got disagree with some of that. A long time.
Yeah, and
There's a little more to it. That's from the city side. There's
right.
more.
Okay, Eric.
And that's why that TIF.
So I just wanted, we don't want to create enemies with the school. That's
No,
all.
I agree.
No, and it's always, I will tell you, the 2 residential TIFs I've worked on, the school corporation is how quickly can you get those houses up?
Perfect.
I mean, that's been my personal experience in Elkhart County. That doesn't mean it's the same here, but I will tell you that's, when you go to establish one, it's really, really important to make sure that you have those conversations with the school. As important as tax revenue is to make sure where you're putting this residential TIF is in a school that can handle the students that are potentially coming, because it could impact their capital investment plans if in fact you bring a humongous new development in an area adjacent to an elementary school that's already at capacity. So there's lots of reasons to have those conversations. But I have not experienced, I worked with TIFs for the last 25 years and we had a lot of concerns. That's why about, 10, 15 years ago, a school board representative is now by law required to be on your redevelopment commission. It wasn't always that way. But I will say that, again, these are conversation starters and they're things to help with school planning to say, hey, we're considering putting one here. There's a benefit to all of us to do that because, again, you're going to be helping with most likely the sewer and water utilities that have to come out for that single family residential. That's what the TIF money is going to be able to be used for anyways. So it's just reducing the cost of the overall development and hopefully helping with some affordability issues with new construction.
And I would see that happening with either some meetings with the superintendent, the schools, Kevin going back to the school board meetings and reporting, hey, this is what's happening. Like there would be some open communication. We would never,
No,
I know.
Can I ask one more question? And I'm picking on Mark because he brought it up, but how do we protect ourselves from being monopolized by a developer? So if we TIF an area that already got a developer on it, and then at that point, they can choose to they may depress that site and not let it happen for a while, or they make it happen. What is their incentive to doing that? So we don't, it seems like you want as many different developers and pockets as you can. How do you not let that happen?
Well, you control the property. If you control the property, you control how it's developed. You don't have that ability right now. You don't have an acquisition list. You can't do that. So your other bet is to cultivate private partners and think through it and say, hey, what kind of incentive can we provide to make this happen? The other thing is that you control the money. It's your money. and how you choose to use it is up to you. So you can talk all day long with people. And if you've got a developer that's doing a lot of great work, that's great. But that again comes back to the conversation about having a set program for incentives. This is what it takes to do that. Also, I will tell you, having very, very strong development agreements that have reverter clauses, payback clauses, so if you have a debt associated with a project, making sure that there is a taxpayer obligation in case you don't collect as much revenue as you think you're going to. That they're on that's a motivation for them to get that building up faster, is if they're gonna have to pay the difference between what's collected and what's owed. So there's lots of tools, but it's all in that development agreement, because once you sign it, you're stuck with what you tell them to do. So that's why it's so important to negotiate all those things up front and get a real strong development agreement that protects your investment while actually creating a viable incentive for the developer.
And I think when we look at, I mean, this sounds like so much information, but as we start to break it down and do certain, like, hey, let's amend the plan. Let's extend the TIF, or as we start to break it down and look at these agreements and how we want to set this up and what our incentives want to be and what our parameters are, I think it won't seem so overwhelming. Please tell me I'm right a little bit.
Well, and you are, this is kind of like a brave new world for you all. You haven't done this yet.
Yes.
And so I do think it makes sense to think through how much of this elephant you can eat at once. And from my perspective, just because it's every time you do anything to that plan, it's 4 meetings. And so for me going, well, hey, I would just do it all at once. That's a lot for you to handle. So does it make sense to do it, which wouldn't be my normal recommendation. I'm like, let's do it most cost effective and time effective as possible. Let's just go in there and amend the plan, add these 2 extra areas, and let's go for it. That said, if you think you've got something happening in your existing TIF that the plan needs to be amended to facilitate, maybe that's phase 1. Let's just look at what we've got, understanding that our goal, once we get through some sort of strategic plan, is to amend and expand. But we know we've got something happening right now. And so that is going to be a 2 or 3 month process just to get an amendment to allow you to do anything besides the water tower that you already built and the road that you already built and
Line the sewer, like literally our
that you
plan.
already did. I mean, that's all you can do right now. So I'm kind of reevaluating what I would have told you to do a couple months ago, which is let's just go big and do it all at once. I think maybe there is some validity, and again, just understanding you're gonna do it twice. But that might be okay, because you just need to get what you've currently got up to par.
So the first one would be small in scope.
It would-
Practice dry run.
Yeah.
For one, with one particular target in mind.
Well, it's your existing TIF. We just have to go in there and amend what you can do. Because right now, you can't do anything. Everything you said you were gonna do in that plan
I'm
is
sorry,
done.
but every time you have an amendment, it's 4 meetings.
Yep.
So we're gonna have 4 meetings with a particular target in mind. And then after we get our feet wet, we do 4 more meetings to make it generally opportune, like take advantage of the opportunity. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I would actually say let's amend the TIF to do what you want to do now, just for the current area.
Let's target, what we've never done, let's use this TIF money on something that brings more revenue back
Before
to our
we expand.
TIF. And then expand it.
So right now, our
Bring more
project
revenue.
description in our current plan says the commission currently contemplates that to accomplish the plan, it will carry out the development of the area, including the acquisition, construction, and installation of a water tower, road reconstruction of Shute Street and Henser Court, which is in our existing TIF, and sanitary sewer structure lining, collectively the project. The commission does not intend to issue bonds payable from tax increment revenues derived from the area. The bonds would be issued in an amount sufficient to finance, blah, blah, blah. Like that's basically
That's it.
it right now. We have not
Given as
found,
examples or those given
And
specifically?
those have all been done.
That's-
There's nothing else we can do.
that's literally in our redevelopment commission economic development plan for that. And I'll send this to you guys, but we have not found that we did. HWC came and did an interchange plan with us, but I don't know that we actually amended the plan to complement this at the time. So,
If it took 4 meetings, I'm sure we did.
yeah.
We didn't have 4 meetings.
So,
Yep.
you're
And
not
so
wrong.
those 4 meetings are what's called a declaratory resolution that says, I am declaring that I'm going to either establish or amend a TIF. Then you go to plan commission, because plan commission has to say what you're planning to do is consistent with our land use plan. Then you go to council, because the council is the elected body. They have to pass a resolution authorizing the TIF, whether it's new or amended. And then you come back and you do your confirming resolution. And that's when you confirm that everything got done that you said was going to be done. And then it triggers, and then the assessed value as of January 1 of the following year is when you start, because remember, it's always a year in the rear.
Yeah.
And so just for that cycle, it's difficult with public meeting requirements to do it in less than 3 months. You might get lucky and do it in 2.5, but based on meeting dates.
You don't have to come to all those meetings. I can represent, or
You have to
somebody
go
can
to 2.
represent. Yeah. So I think that we can start with biting off little pieces and working on this. I dug in to find any amendments and I just didn't. So this is where we're standing right now. But we will work on that portion. We will kind of start looking at some TIF boundaries, talk about that. We'll, so plan on meetings. In December, the next meeting date is what do we do? The Wednesdays, is it the 18th? I'm sorry, I'm looking. I don't know if I have on my calendar here.
So is this your regular meeting? It's the first Wednesday of the month.
Right.
Oh, yeah, so it would be the 4th. I don't know why I was going down so far. I was thinking of another one, but so yeah, we'll get kind of an email thread, talk about our next steps, but are you guys okay? Does everybody feel good? Like, I'm excited for us to be active, but I know it's a lot of work.
I think speaking for me, I'm excited about it. But I also know that a lot of what we just talked about was a real big
Yes.
timeframe. It isn't all going to happen right away. So it's eating the elephant that you talked about. I think we're ready to start eating the elephant and go back and relook at what we already have. And we're going to learn from that process.
Yes.
So.
And if we want Crystal, because again, I'm learning some of this along with you. So if we want Crystal to come in December and say, hey, give us a quick education of, TIF districts or increment, whatever it is that you are, how this 140 gets in there, or whatever you have questions about, send it to me and say, hey, I need these addressed, or we can email back and forth, whatever. But we want to try to keep we'll have agendas for each meeting. We want to keep them moving, we don't want to keep you guys here all night, and she has to drive back to South Bend or Elkhart tonight.
Well,
So
to your point, you asked about being excited. What I get excited about is that if we create a larger district and we have money and we amend, we can use this money for some good in this city, which has
Yes.
bothered me for, years. I've sat here and we've kind of waited to do something. So I also see that Crystal's an investment and we're going to have our hands held for a while. So that's just my point. I'm just throwing that out there, that nobody should think we're going to go off and do all this by ourselves without somebody that knows what they're doing.
no, this is something that we've never done in this community
That's
ever.
exactly right. And it all makes sense, but we don't know how to do it.
Right. And we don't want to plug a hole or do something just for a quick fix on
Nope.
anything. We want to make sense for our community for the next 50 years, and beyond. So these are important decisions that we are making, and our administration at the city and our council is allowing us to say, hey, we're going to let you guys make these decisions. And they're supportive. And it's not always that way in some communities. So we have a big responsibility, but there's a lot going on. And I do think we can do some good. And I think we can start spurring some development and some incentives But yes, it's a process, for sure,
Well,
for sure.
and to that, the last council meeting I attended just because I wanted to meet Crystal and hear about the money allocation. That was like a 1-minute conversation with the council. He threw it out there. We want $40,000 that we can use for this. And they're like, done. I was like, I sat here for an hour for 30 seconds worth of content.
Not
It was
arguing
fast.
with me.
I-
That may not always happen. Sometimes
but
they
I
may say,
was
Retha, why are you
shocked.
asking for this money? But
It was wonderful.
yeah, they have been very supportive. We have a good council and they're supportive and they're willing to let us start doing some of this stuff. And I think that that's a big deal. So
So you guys, both of the two of you know what you're gonna do next. Can we move on to our agenda and
yes,
get it closed up? Because I think
we're good.
I heard you have plenty on your plate. Do we have any reports from officers or members? We have that from Ryan. I don't think there's anything else. Kim, did you have anything? No report. Okay. And anything else from staff?
No, sir.
Okay, then I think we are ready to take a motion to adjourn. If anybody- John?
Second.
Caroline? Is it Caroline?
I don't know.
Caroline
or Carrie, I'll answer.
Caroline, okay, because I don't like to call people by the wrong name. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Nay? Nope.
Thank
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Wow.
Your head's going.